This week is Christmas for Idle Heroes, and that means we've been given a brand new Transcendence hero, the first of Wave 3 of the Transcendence heroes. Now, if you were here this time last year, it was when Eos was released as a Transcendence hero, and she was very, very strong. Or at least at the time she was. Of course, more heroes have come out that power crept her, or at least pushed her out of where she needed to be. But will the same thing happen with Doom Terminator Vulcan, or is he even good to begin with? Well, today we're going to be looking at him, breaking down his skills, letting you know what you need to about him so far, and of course I'll leave you with some questions that we need to think about as we move forwards. It has of course been less than 24 hours that we've been able to really test him, but they're all very promising things looking from his skill set so far, and I'm expecting he's going to be one of the new big formidable Transcendence heroes. But of course it raises the question, should you build him early or stick to the paths we already know? Well, hopefully we can answer some of these questions today. Having a look, you've got Doom Terminator Vulcan. He is different from other Transcendence heroes in that you actually see normal Vulcan become Doom Terminator Vulcan. I like this flavor, the idea that Vulcan is just piloting this mech suit. Transcendence heroes have originally been supremely enchanted versions of their former selves, but Vulcan's like, nah bro, I'm just gonna go all Iron Man and just build a suit. I kind of like it, I think it's cool. The big thing for Vulcan is these things called charged energies. They are the things allowing Vulcan to do a lot of damage. Because if you look at his base abilities, we'll basically break it down, he's doing 800% of attack damage to one enemy. That's not a lot, that's a single target hit. I mean, like Vessa's attack does that, but then 4 more times against a single enemy, so he does need to be getting a lot more damage to even compete with Vessa in single target fights. So let's look. We've got a concentrated ray. Each layer, when it's consumed, will do 300% of attack damage to 2 random enemies 2 to 4 times. So that's weird, because it means sometimes it could do 600% of attack damage, other times it could do 1200% of attack damage. So there is an inconsistency to his damage there. I guess that means if people did want to try use him in Star Expedition, they're going to see different numbers each time, but we already see that anyway because the variance in Star Expedition is a little wild. I can't wait to actually see people testing him in that game mode. I might even try to do that as well if I can get a copy of him on the VIP series when Star Expedition comes along. The Magic Explosion is another layer he can have, and that does 500% of attack damage to, again, 2 enemies with the lowest HP. This is nice, so it's not random enemies, it's the lower enemies, so it's going to find them out and kill them, which is good, and it's guaranteed to crit as well. So that actually synergizes with assassins. I like that they've added an ability like that to him. And also he'll deal damage equal to 10% of the target's lost HP. Again, a very assassin style ability that's focusing on lower HP enemies. And it's lost HP as well, so it's enemies that will definitely have taken damage already. And that will cap out at 1500% of Doom Terminator's attack. So that's pretty cool. He's actually getting a decent attack there that's stockpiling in for more damage. It's only 500% of attack damage, so again, I don't think it's going to rival Vessa on single target damage unless he's got something more that can push him ahead. Each layer from this Freezing Pierce, which is the final of his charge energies, will deal 1200% of attack damage to all enemies. Now that's a very good thing we want to go ahead and read. All enemies getting hit is crucial, because in fights where there's 4 opponents, 5 opponents, 6 opponents, right? That's a lot of Void Campaign, Realms Gate, Void Vortex, game modes like that, where you actually do want to see big burst heroes doing well. I mean, that's where Eos really does shine sometimes. You'll see that here, this ability does come into play. As well, it does reduce the speed of opponents by 20. This can be very helpful in Void Campaign or Void Vortex if you're struggling with the speed of opponents, because they can get pretty fast as you approach that late game content. And as well, there's a 40% chance for him to inflict Freeze, Cold, Chill for 2 rounds, which is really neat. He actually gets a crowd control ability. So one thing that sets him apart from other Transcendence heroes we've seen in the past is he's got crowd control and damage. I really like this. It's the idea that he's kind of a jack of all trades, really, with this active skill. He also gains this added ability, which is called Annihilation Pursuit, which will trigger when he's consumed 10 layers of this charged energy, and he will gain this Annihilation Pursuit, which allows him to deal 360% of damage to surviving enemies, and it will be split out across them. That's very similar to Starlight. If you haven't seen this, was the first time we ever saw this on a hero like Starlight, when The active skill actually bursts and does damage spread across the opponents proportional to how many are left. So if there's only one opponent, they're going to take the full brunt. So in boss fights, if you can trigger Annihilation Pursuit reliably, 3600% of damage actually can begin to bridge the gap between Doom Terminator Vulcan and Vesa. The reason I'm stressing Vesa right now is because really Fairy Queen Vesa is and has been for quite some time the main boss killer in the game. And that's because she does 1800% of attack damage to one random enemy, but that's going to attack 4 times. That's the really cool thing, is boom, 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 boom. So if there's only one opponent in the fight, that's 1800% of attack damage that they'll have to take 4 times. So it's 1800, 3600, 7200% of attack damage. And then of course she's got the added healing and shield she gives as well. That's what makes Vesa so good at single targeting opponents. In the case of Vulcan, we need him to match those numbers if he's going to be able to compete with Vesa as a person to fight against bosses. And if he isn't able to do that, he better be damn good, because he's going to have to be able to be good in Void Campaign. We've already seen that he does do lots of damage to opponents based on all these skills, but the question is, how does he get all these charged energies? Well, if we look to his final passive, you'll go ahead and see that when any ally releases or takes damage by a basic attack, you'll see that there is a 50% chance for him to gain a layer. So that's nice. The more opponents you're facing, the more concentrated energy he will get, because of course the more hits from opponents' attacks you will receive. This is great. That actually means that Doom Terminator Vulcan probably isn't actually a hero we want to be using in boss fights too much. He's someone we want to go against 4, 5, or 6-man teams. That means he's phenomenal in Seal Land. Barry already managed to do a Seal Land 25 clear with Vulcan and not much other support, and he was a Tree of Origin 5 with 1.6, 1.7 million attacks, so not a lot of attack, and the fact he breezed through it first time was absolutely fantastic. So you can see, based on just how he gains these things, even just looking at Concentrated Ray, he wants to be fighting with a big team and also have a lot of opponents. So this does sound to me like someone that's going to be good in game modes like Seal Land, Force War especially, and also potentially Void Campaign as well. Magic Explosion, whenever an ally or enemy releases an active skill, there's a 50% chance for him to gain a layer. So again, we see him doing very well when there's multiple opponents and multiple allies doing active skills. So again, I think his power is going to scale the more people on the opposing team. And then Freezing Pierce, this is really nice. Whenever an ally or enemy dies, there's a 100% chance for him to gain a layer. And that was the big damage that he goes in and does against all of the opponents and slows them down. Now, those of you that know a lot about Transcendence heroes and how to make them work, whenever you read whenever an ally dies or enemy dies, there is a really cool thing that you can take advantage of. Because, first of all, Lord of Death, Azrael, when he dies, deals a lot of damage to opponents and then resurrects himself. That's very strong. It means he can die, come back, die, come back, die, come back, and that will then synergize with Doom Terminator Vulcan, allowing him to consistently gain Freezing Pierce. As well, if you didn't know, Star Alchemist Holmes Young, for all that he isn't a very powerful hero, his core actually shuts down opponents by giving perceptual disorder to them, which means that they do not get to use abilities. You can see when an ally dies, there is a 50% chance to inflict perceptual disorder on the 2 enemies with the highest attack. So it focuses the most powerful opponents and shuts them down, because perceptual disorder removes their ability to attack and do basic attacks and replaces that with an ability that poisons their team. It's really, really strong. Perceptual disorder is a disgusting ability, and Star Alchemist Holmes Young is probably one of the most unbalanced heroes for that reason, just simply because his core, if you can abuse it properly with heroes dying and coming back, can really be powerful. People like to use Lord of Death Azrael and a carry alongside Star Alchemist Holmes Young, and that will then have 2 triggers of Doom Terminator Vulcan's effect. Now add to that the fact that it has a cap of 2, you can actually then put 2 layers on this, meaning when he does his active skill, he's not doing 1200% of attack damage, he's going to do 2400% of attack damage, reduce their speed by 40, and then have 2 chances to trigger Freeze, Cold, Chill. What also makes this wild is if you go ahead, and I think this is brilliant, and sublime his active skill, he also releases the Freezing Pierce an additional time. So that's another 1200% of attack damage and another 20 speed reduction and an additional chance to crowd control. This is wild and unlike any hero we've seen before if you can reliably give him Freezing Pierce. And that's why I think a suicide hero that dies and comes back and dies and comes back can be really strong. And of course, as you kill opponents, that's going to snowball this ability as well, because killing opponents recharges his freezing Pierce. So much like we see with light heroes like Eos and Faithblade, when they kill opponents, it only makes them stronger. So I really do like seeing this ability put into Doom Terminator Vulcan, as it will definitely be able to be abused. And if you're worried about that cap only being 2, if you read when the cap of any charged energy is reached, he will gain an extra 15% of attack. That's also great. So he's like, oh, well, I can't gain any more of these energies. Guess I'm going to buff myself. Awesome. He then also removes 2 random debuffs from himself, so he heals himself from negative effects, and then gains immunity to fear. This is good potentially in Star Expedition if we find him to be a good damage dealer there, but also good against any opponent that can fear you. That's really important for Force War, as in Force War, Horrify, Fear, that effect is everywhere, and it's likely that in PvP, people will be running Lord of Fear Aspen in a good number of lineups if you've reached a point where Doom Terminator Vulcan is viable, so Fear immunity could be interesting there. It's mostly, though, a good thing to have, because Fear is a very common CC given to bosses and opponents, added to a lot of PvE content, so yeah, I like the fact that he can give himself some form of Fear immunity. One thing that I don't like about this, though, is there's a 50% chance to gain the Concentrated Ray and Magic Explosion. So there is a chance that we can low roll here, which is unfortunate. And as well, considering that the Concentrated Rays are already inconsistent with a 2, 3, or 4 times hit, you really don't know what you're going to end up with Concentrated Rays. So for me, I'm focusing on this Freezing Pierce as his main source of damage, because that's the one that's got the most impact. It can crowd control, it can speed debuff, and of course hits everybody for big damage. And I was already seeing when I was using him in Realms Gate and just testing against those kind of teams, it was Freezing Pierce that was having the biggest impact and giving him the most damage. If that didn't trigger, he was not getting big damage numbers. But if Freezing Pierce did trigger, wow, you were getting fantastic numbers. So really, that's what you want to be seeing. You want to see Freezing Pierce trigger, and that's when the snowball effect begins. Now, his basic attack is interesting. This does 600% of attack damage to frontline enemies. That's cute. It's not fantastic. But actually, if you upgrade this, I believe he has like really interesting negative effects he can do. Yeah, he can reduce the energy of frontline opponents by 30. So if he's forced into a basic attack, maybe you don't have energy feed on your team, that's actually a pretty good thing. As well, he has energy recovery. So when he releases a basic attack, if you've sublimed this, there are 2 50% chances to obtain Concentrated Ray and Magic Explosion. So that means the added abilities you have from his active skill become more consistent. The only issue is if he's doing a basic attack, he's not consuming the ones he's already gathered from his passive, so it's likely that's going to make you more likely to reach the cap. But as we've already established, reaching caps is not a bad thing, because that's going to give you a 15% buff in attack. That means when he does finally do that active skill, he's going to hit like a truck. And also his basic attack gets an extra precision boost. So this is cute if you're not running perfect energy feed. You can actually get some good use out of his basic attacks, and I think him doing a basic attack every now and then is not a bad thing. Energy steal and gaining more of those layers, that's pretty good. Now the final thing here is his second passive skill. At the end of each round, he's going to restore himself HP. Brilliant. That's just good. End of round healing, that's guaranteed. Really solid ability to have, and also gives himself a shield equal to 500% of attack. So if we can scale up his attack massively, he's actually going to add to his own survivability at the end of each round. Thumbs up from me. Really like this ability. And it means if you want to build a tanky Doom Terminator Vulcan, that likely synergizes really nicely with the new artifact, which also gives shields, right? So you can use those two things together, and with that fan, you can give him really reliable protection. You might find that damage builds are favored with a Melodic Strings or with Punisher of Immortal in certain game modes, but perhaps tankier builds will rise up if we need them, and that's probably where you'll either see Golden Crown or, of course, the new artifact fan coming into play. Fun to see in the future which one becomes the more viable build, because I think both are usable at different times. When an enemy will release an active skill, he gains a layer of analysis as well. That's really helpful. The more enemies you have, again, the more active skills he'll be facing, so of course the more analysis he'll get. And with each layer of analysis he gains, he's going to get damage reduction increased by 3%. So that's nice. Again, more tanky things being thrown at him. And then when he has 15 layers of analysis, he'll consume all of those layers and gain weakness disclosure. during which analysis can no longer be obtained, and weakness disclosure is a skill effect that increases the damage reduction that he has by 45%. So again, making him super duper tanky. I think he can definitely reach damage reduction caps. Crazy. But then he will ignore 100% of all enemies' armor, damage reduction, all damage reduction, block, dodge, and crit damage resistance until he does an active skill. So this basically means, look, I'm going to give myself the biggest damage buff I possibly can, remove all your defenses, and then when I release an active skill, you're going to get hit by everything, and then I'm going to go out of this mode. So if it's possible to stockpile as many concentrated rays, magic explosions, freezing pierces onto him, he goes into weakness disclosure mode and then triggers an active skill, it seems very unlikely that the enemy team has much chance of surviving at all, because Unbending Will not eat through this, right? Unbending Will get hit by so many layers that it will die, right? The enemy will get massacred. On top of that, there are so many different damage sources with loads of crit being added in, not to mention that he already gains additional crit damage whilst under the effect of weakness disclosure. It's insane. At the end of each round, he can get himself an extra layer of analysis, so he's going to go into weakness disclosure form more often. He's get HP and attack, and you can see here that this definitely promotes a tanky build, because it's like, look, keep Terminator Vulcan around, allow him to live, allow him to stockpile his charges, and if he finally goes into weakness disclosure form, he's going to go berserk and obliterate the opposing team. This could make him a really good killer later on into a fight, which is pretty interesting, provided you're not dying really quickly. So this means you're going to need heroes to shut down the opposing team to give you some time. Heroes that come to mind here are Starwing Jara, whose win condition is literally just crowd controlling the whole opposing team. So if she comes in here with her active skill, she can cold chill or rock lock opponents, which is really, really cool. Also, you might want to go ahead and run a burstier hero like a Star Swordsman Mockman, as he's just a straight up good damage dealer early on and does some good stuff there too. Or you might want to go into a full survival strategy and just run a Mystic Fairy Freya and add to the snowballing effect by giving her evolutionary factor to Vulcan as well, by giving her that final passive Noble Sublimation, which gives her the evolutionary factor buff to the Vulcan. That's just a really strong ability, so that can snowball nicely as well. And you probably might even want to consider running Vesa, as Vesa is of course giving you shields and added protection, and Halora also comes to mind, as Halora is not just a good hero for her counterattacks from Queen's Guard and improving the all damage dealt by your team, but also if you look, she gains a lot of abilities that improve your defenses, right? Here you can see that you're gaining all damage reduction from Queen's Guard. You're also gaining additional reduction of the opponent's attack when Queen's Guard is triggered. And a really strong thing here a lot of people don't know about is when her Noble Sublimation on her second passive skill is triggered, you could see that Queen's Guard is going to allow her to heal your team. That's really good. Healing is fantastic. So we're already seeing a lot of potential synergies with Vulcan, keeping him alive and going for those big damage numbers from other Transcendence heroes. So overall, I think he's going to be a massive damage dealer that requires some time to get ready. So either you want to build him tanky so that he has time to stockpile this stuff and really take advantage of weakness disclosure. That's a viable strat. Or you just want to go for full burst, Punisher of Immortal, Melodic Strings, whatever you can get your hands on to really shut down the opposing team. Some strategies may be to run him slower than the rest of the heroes on your team so you can get a lot of magic explosions and freezing pierces in, maybe even slower than the opponents so that Lord of Death Azrael can die, right? And then give him a layer of freezing pierce, and once this active skill is sublime, that's going to be 2 triggers of that. You'll then slow down the opponents, so going into round 2 they'll be slow, and of course you can potentially CC them with freeze cold chill, which is nice because again he's synergizing with himself, right? He's freezing opponents, which only adds to his survivability, so that's really nice. He does improve his own damage reduction again, so it's crazy. Like, I really am excited to see what a Doom Terminator Vulcan can do. And if you can't already tell, the conclusions about this hero is he is super versatile. You can build him in multiple ways, and I think we're going to see lots of good strategies emerge. The fact he synergizes with already existing strategies like the one person on your team dying strat with Lord of Death Azrael, Star Alchemist Holmes Young, the fact that he's able to just live in and sit with a team with Freya and Halora and stay alive and take advantage of that is again fantastic. But of course, that's probably leaving a lot of you wondering, how the heck do you squeeze him into a team when you don't have a lot of Transcendence heroes? And that's a really good question? Well, if you're like that, if you do not have a lot of Transcendence heroes and you want to try them out, I think heroes to add to survivability will always be good. So running someone like an Olivia, who can shrink the opponents and give Fairy's Guard, will be good. I think Amun-Ra will definitely stand out as well, as the bubbles she gives from Guardian Shadow are fantastic for mitigating damage, so that could also be good. Amun-Ra can also crowd control opponents, which is really, really strong. And you may find that heroes that will be able to buff him, like Rogan, could be potentially really, really good. Will he be good as a first Transcendence hero? I don't think so. I think that's really bold if you want to build him as a first Transcendence hero. And I think this is for two reasons. First of all, if you go ahead and look at his tenants, they are not great. First of all, it's really light and dark heavy. So first slot, himself and Mockman. Second slot, Andrea or Io. So that's a Transcendence hero or a light hero. Not ideal. We've got Azrael and Tussalago. I mean, I guess you could pick up Azrael and slick him in this slot, but then what the heck's an Azrael going to do? Maybe the Azrael will synergize with the Vulcan. Die, come back, die, come back. That could maybe work. You'll have to wait and see if that's a viable strat in the early game. And then we've got Tenant Spot 4, which is Aurelia, which is another tricky hero to get, but of course, as the game goes on, that will be a little easier to grab. And then, of course, we have Asmodel the Dauntless, another Transcendence hero, so not the best tenants. Of course, I think then, if the tenants aren't that great, and you're going to need time to establish light and dark heroes, I think the earliest you can successfully build Vulcan is as your second Transcendence hero, and then you're going to need someone else with him to be a tenant, and that would probably be Eos. I would be really curious to see what a mega bursty light team could do, because Eos plus Vulcan is probably a really interesting combo for pushing Seal Land. Like, you see people using Mystic Fairy Freya and Fairy Queen Vesa together for exactly that reason, because the two of them are forest heroes, they work great in Seal Land and can get you deeper in there. With Vulcan, he's got Eos, so maybe that's a strategy here where we can go ahead and use Eos with Vulcan. Eos is massive burst, and she does something when she dies, so that again could synergize with Vulcan. She steals energy when she's dead as well, which is going to add to his survivability. Interesting to see what that combo could do. But I think if you're pivoting into that, you don't want to start with Eos or Vulcan. You probably still want to go with the LOE strategy and run Fairy Queen Vesa. And then when you do get to your second Transcendence hero, pivot into Eos and Vulcan. I think that's the earliest I could see a viable build for him. Will that be better than Lord of Fear Aspen and Sword Flash? That remains to be seen. That is already the best combo if you have the artifacts to make it work. But then again, you could argue that maybe Vulcan is less artifact intensive. Maybe he just wants to be sitting there with the new artifact, with that fan, and staying alive, and you don't really need much else. Maybe it's really optimal for artifact progression, and it's a justifiable strategy. We'll have to wait and see. And of course, we've already seen, based on looking and analyzing his skills, he really likes facing teams of multiple opponents. So perhaps there is something for him in the Void Vortex. But he is very active skill reliant, so will be countered by carries, so watch out for them. You might still want to energy feed him with an Ignis to ensure that there is a chance he gets that active skill off before the carries shut him down. We'll have to see how that plays out. But I think the way you can walk away from this review is with an optimistic outlook. I think Vulcan is going to give us new ways of approaching the mid and late game of Idle Heroes, and this is exactly what we need for the game, because things have begun to stagnate. There's really only been two viable strategies in the mid game, which is Vesa plus Mystic Fairy Freya, or Sword Flash plus Lord of Fear Aspen. And of those two strategies, Lord of Fear Aspen plus Sword Flash is the more viable one because it hits things like Vortex very nicely. Whereas maybe Vulcan plus Eos could be another way to go. That's a lot of burst damage. And burst damage is also really good against bosses, so it might not match Mystic Fairy Freya and Vesa for damage, but still could be pretty darn good, that given how good it will probably be at the Void Vortex and Realms Gate, actually becomes the best middle ground choice. And I mean, Vulcan can CC, so maybe we'll see something interesting come from there. Either way, I am very excited, and I want to know what you guys think about Doom Terminator Vulcan in the comments section down below, and I'm really keen to see what you guys are able to do with him in the months that come ahead, because of course it's going to take time for people to get copies, get Transcendence heroes, but I am excited to be able to give you potentially better mid-game recommendations in the future that aren't just the typical routes we've been taking. I'm excited, folks, and I think you should be too. But until next time, Happy idling.